Welcome to Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Let's talk Arborvitae fern. This is Selaginella braunii. Some people call it an Arborvitae fern. It's not an Arborvitae, so it's not a conifer, and it's also not a fern. It's actually a club moss. It does have spores, similar to a fern. Has a really super soft texture that you kind of want to touch. But again, you're looking at it and you're like, is that a little conifer, a little thuja, or is that a fern? And again, it's neither. This is a great ground cover. It's evergreen. It's green during the summer months and kind of this russet color during the winter months. In colder zones, it can get a bit haggard in the wintertime, but in warmer zones, I'm in zone 7B in Raleigh, and it just gets this russet color on the top of it, and it absolutely looks fantastic. Stays really tight, matted to the ground. This is great for something that will prevent weeds in the garden and cover some ground. And also reduce the amount of mulch you're using. You see this beautiful lacy fern-like foliage, and here we are shooting this at the beginning of January because we wanted to show some of that russet coloration. Again, down in the plant where it's been a little bit warmer, it's still dark green, and so you can see what that summer look of it would be. This is a slow-growing ground cover that gets maybe between 6 inches in height and 12 inches in height, but my experience everywhere I see it, it's about 9 inches in height. So, the truth is somewhere right there in the middle. Most people are going to say get 1 to 2 feet in width, but there's nothing stopping it from getting wider. It's not in any hurry, so it's not any kind of threat to take over your bed quickly, but it'll ultimately get wider than that. If you're using it as a ground cover and planting it in a group, you'd probably want to plant them about 2 to 3 feet apart. Most of the time on this Garden Plants channel and over on my Hort Tube with Jim Putnam channel, we're talking about flowers, or fragrance, something like that. This is not that. This is a great evergreen plant that can help prevent some weeds, help reduce the amount of mulch that you're using in the garden. It has great texture. You put it next to other leafy things, other foliage color things. That's the reason we're using this in the garden. It's hardy in zone 6 to 9. Those of you in zone 6, if you have a real zone 6 winter and it gets very cold, it might go beyond russet and end up looking a little bit tattered toward the end of winter. It'll just flush right back out of that. In the more southern climates, it's either going to stay almost all green or slightly russet or somewhere in between like it is here at our house. This is definitely a part shade or shade loving evergreen perennial. We have it in a very shady space. This spot is actually, I would say that this would like kind of medium moisture. I think that if you were reading about this anywhere, people would say just evenly moist soil would be great. This is actually a very dry spot. In the wintertime, it's below a red bud. The red bud's dormant. So imagine in the wintertime, it's fairly moist here. In the summer, this red bud gets very greedy, and it's very dry here. So I've actually had some good experience now with this plant in fairly dry conditions. Initially, when we put it in the ground, I don't think we knew it was quite as dry over here, and it got a little smaller on us pretty quickly, and then we figured out we had to water it a few times. Once we got past that initial watering it a few times and it anchored itself in here, it hit the ground running, has recovered and grown beautifully the end of 2022 season. So where are we going to use this beautiful evergreen fern-like plant? Well, it's great, obviously, in a woodland shade garden. Talked about that already. Actually works great as a container plant. And when I see them growing in containers at nurseries, they really look fantastic in a container. Also actually works as a house plant. And it has that dense matting habit. So you can tuck this thing up in between shrubs almost while you're waiting for shrubs to fill in. If you plant shrubs 3-4 feet apart that get pretty wide in the future, you can tuck this slightly up in front of them, and as the shrubs get bigger, they'll figure it out, and this will just kind of wrap around them. But great for a filler in a shade bed. So it will take moist, well-drained conditions. Again, I found it very adaptable to this dry shade condition over here as well. I mound things up a bit in our clay-based soil, and so again, you don't want this plant overly wet. We will. This doesn't really require any pruning, but if you get some kind of ratty foliage in here. You can prune it out in the late winter. We fertilize everything here in the landscape in the late winter with an organic fertilizer. It just wants these like highly organic soils. And so when we started this project here, we put down a layer of compost, and then we actually put down some wood chips, and then those wood chips broke down over some period of time. So we have a fair amount of organic material in our soil, and I think that's one of the reasons this plant is thriving. So it wouldn't particularly like very lean soil. So even if you had a shady space out by the road, you know, in between a sidewalk and the road, and it happened to be shady, if that was like a super lean soil, I don't think it's going to be a great place for it. I think it does want high organic material, evenly moist or even slightly dry, as long as it's high organic material. Very pest resistant, deer resistant, rabbit resistant, you know, all those kinds of things that you want in an ornamental landscape plant. But I really love this plant. I mean, this is one of those plants that you touch it once and you're like, oh man, it's just beautiful. And again, it kind of fools the eye. Is it, you know, is it a little tiny dwarf conifer? Is it a fern? You know, what is it? But this is Selaginella braunii, otherwise known as Arborvitae fern.